Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and acknowledge their immense contribution to this world in which we live. Okay. Going back in history a little bit is always useful, helps set the context. In 1850, a Scottish immigrant by the name of Henry Burden, upstate New York, built a huge water wheel to power his industrial operations, because he knew that if he was to be in business and to be successful, he had to control the power. And as a result of this, he became very successful. He was the main supplier of horseshoes to the expanding US Army and also spikes to the expanding US rail network. And yet, within a few short decades, all that, if you like, dominance was shattered by the emergence of Westinghouse, electricity generation and transmission, which put power wherever the industrialists wanted it. And I'm going to come back to this concept of context and what it means when platforms change. Now, we can't talk about big data unless, of course, we understand the notion of convergence and context. And up the top there, we see the actual foundations of our economy are changing and being re-architected. In Australia, we have the new payment platform, which is a new infrastructure being put in place by the Reserve Bank and together with the banks. The actual architecture of our payment system is changing. 5G, just think about what that will do in the future with far higher transmission speeds. The World Wide Web Consortium has actually changed the infrastructure of the internet, if you think about this, to take into account the Internet of Things. And as well, as we go around that wheel, we see processing power, different types of models, and government's response is usually intrusive legislation. So what does that mean, that massive generation of capability on the basis of new infrastructure? Now, many of us have seen this quote, and it will eat government service delivery, admin and policy, or will it? So let's have a little look. We should challenge ourselves. This is what it will look like. A study from Oxford University, this foundational change that's happening in our underpinnings of our society, together with massive computing capabilities, driving a third wave, which will hollow out many of the jobs which will be subject to disruption through machine learning, algorithms and so forth. And many of these jobs are jobs that are in the public sector. So we've got two dimensions that we're dealing with here: the re-engineering of the machinery of government, and also what happens to policy and democracy when the middle class itself is hollowed out. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to have a little walk through some changes in other industries, and keep in mind Burden's wheel as we go through this. So the digital disruption of transport. And so we're seeing one of these images here, what it might have been like in a train with mostly gentlemen reading their big newspapers. And now what we see is people crammed on trains, and so much more is happening on trains than just being transported. So the notion of the train itself is changing. So the train becomes a platform rather than leaving from the platform. So let's have a look at other types of commercial operations on trains. This is in Switzerland. We have the Starbucks train, a reimagining of what that asset is. And by Starbucks applying their patterns of configuration of shops into rolling stock of trains, figured out that they could actually fit almost the same number of passengers in that carriage, but the commercial opportunities were somewhat different. Do you pay a ticket, or do you just go and consume coffee and have other things while you are in transit? And of course, we've had this discussion, and when we think about it, that data then becomes the platform from manual to automatic to self-driving cars. The car here then becomes a data platform to inform policy. I won't talk a lot about this one because I think it speaks for itself, but the little image down in the corner called Candy is a car vending machine in China. So you go along and you pay equivalent of a few dollars, and you can hire this car, which is a little tiny smart car, and basically it comes down in the lift and pops out, and it has a SIM in it, so you can find wherever the car is at any point in time. And the way it's been configured, the back of the car is the size of a flat screen television box, so whoever's using the car can go and buy their flat screen television, take it home and then return the car. So when you think about modularity and interoperability, is amazing. We've always got to look beyond our Western economies to innovation happening in other areas. And this is a great innovation from Vietnam, where after-sales service, an anti-theft SIM card, is actually fitted to motorbikes. And I think we've all seen, you know, Vietnam, which is so dependent on their motorbikes. So, but one of the issues is motorbikes get lost or stolen. So if they get stolen, the user simply calls the bike, which disables it, and sends the owner of the bike a location of where the bike is. So, so these are phenomenal things that are happening in many other locations. The digital disruption of power, well, what's it going to look like? Windmills, well, maybe not with some of our politicians, but what about this? So solar panels on your roof and put a Tesla battery with it. So you can be off the grid. It raises questions then about who owns the data, and is that actually an asset for the consumer to sell? So instead of giving your power back to the grid, maybe you sell your data back to the grid, and it's a completely different commercial model happening. Digital disruption of education. 4 images here for you to try to consume. We all know about edX and massively online courses, which is changing things, and the massive data can do this. But society is changing, so education's no longer the thing you did after school and then stopped and went into work. What's now happening, obviously, is ongoing, continuous learning, which is what these MOOCs actually appeal to. So when you look at that graph there from the New York University, it shows the increase in college costs as opposed to the general increase in inflation, way outstripping it. So the value proposition has actually been totally demolished. And that little form there is Australian immigration form, hello to colleagues here, to apply for a student visa. So when you put these things together, you're saying, what outcome does, in this instance, the Australian government want? Does it really understand these converging issues? And could it be that our export industry of tertiary education in a few years will be totally hollowed out? Do we understand that? The digital disruption of accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, typically we talk about websites and having letters that are bigger than one another. Here we've got Microsoft, the guide dogs in the United Kingdom, and the whole Catapult initiative, looking at having Wi-Fi in particular cities and having information beacons around those cities. And a blind person who makes it very difficult to navigate around cities will have bone conducting headsets which can pick up this information and communicate it to the person, information like, you know, the bus timetable, or that there's a gap, you know, between the platform and the train. And have a look at this. It's actually a video, and the blind participants say how much this changes their life because it reduces their anxiety of just moving around day to day. I was blind and now I have bionic eyes. Now this is the actual meshing of technology with the human interface. And so here we have a blind person fitted with a pair of camera-equipped glasses hooked up to electrodes which are implanted on the eyeball and feed the brain visual information. I contend that there is no such thing as privacy anymore. The digital disruption of retail. One of my favourite pastimes, check out deadmalls.com. Where are the shoppers? Well, don't blame the internet, okay? The internet's not done it. It's the fat, bloated business models who've failed to change. But the customers are actually in the stores. They're experiencing a very deep, immersive customer experience, augmented by data. Remember we spoke about Tesla with batteries? Here we've got Tesla. One of their greatest innovation is that they now sell like Apple sells. Their cars in really neat shops, in shopping malls. And augmented reality is an economic reality now. This is in Singapore. I've seen it. I've been that lady that's tried on an augmented reality dress, and I've got to say, it's phenomenal. Okay, so when you think about the levels of infrastructure that are changing to make this happen, so what does it mean for us? Well, think about the dead shopping malls. Think about the Canberra Centre for those who've come from Canberra. You think about the ways in which perhaps some of our ideas around building and economic development are actually influenced. So remember the people on the train reading the newspapers or on their things. Okay, so we go from pop-up stall to pop-up wall. The bottom picture is actually in Sydney. This is happening. So you buy your stuff. Where are the bags? So everybody wants to have that customer interface. Australia Post, and even Volvo. You buy a new Volvo car, okay, it'll come with a capability where you can actually have a delivery person message the car will send a message to the delivery person, it's got a secure thing at the back of the car, and your groceries can be delivered straight to your car. The digital disruption of information and payments, okay, out of Kenya. These aren't smartphones, well they probably are now, but these are feature phones. So where an exchange of value, information about IOU is communicated between two parties with the value taken off the SIM. And so this whole economy has now flourished because of this very, very simple messaging. I think there's a message there around simple messaging. It gets better because these are now platforms. Here we have USAID, the equivalent of AusAid, working with M-Pesa, M being mobile and Pesa being payment, to deliver health information over this network, specifically to deliver maternal health information to women, because typically women will also have the phones. So here we're seeing health outcomes delivered in context with economic outcomes. And of course, what is a bank? Think about that new payment platform I spoke about earlier, and this is about the exchange of information. The Basics card that many here were involved in actually was a new payment tool. Many in government still think about payments as a transactional type of process rather than as a strategic tool. Digital disruption with the Internet of Things, all made possible by the changes in the infrastructure. We can go on here, things implanted with sensors and to communicate. The only one I wouldn't worry about is a connected diaper, because forget it. But the sheath on the heart with sensors that can communicate to the doctor information about abnormal heart movement. And the search for the signal will become the biggest battle in my view, the search for the signal. And here, that image up there won a photographic prize about a year ago. African migrants in Djibouti City. They know where to go at the edge of this city at a particular time of the night to get the best signal from the neighbouring countries. Okay, so the battle for oil, forget it, it's now the battle for the signal. So let's have a look at what's happening in government. Okay, so a good thing, back in 1997, so this is nearly 20 years ago, the Australian government said, well, we've got to do something about red tape. And $17 billion a year of compliance burden. Came up with three things, phenomenal things. One, that there would be a single point of entry for business to government, and that's the business entry point. Two, there would be a unique business identifier, which is now the ABN, that's a platform, and that there would be authentication between business and government. What was not fully understood here was that these initiatives represented platforms. So how have we gone? Well, that burden now is not better, it's worse, and this is why it's worse. So in the year 2000, the Australian government, in fact all governments, came out and they said, okay, we've got to get everything online, forgetting that it's actually about platforms. And so this year 2000 strategy said we're going to put everything online, but we're still going to deliver written documents and faxes and so forth. Fast forward to the year 2013, and the Australian, the Coalition's policy for e-government said exactly the same thing. We're going to put everything online, and you can even still have it in hard copy. So the thinking really hasn't advanced, and we're still taking this agency by agency approach. And the missing component in both of these were transformation and the client experience. So as a result of that, the agencies did exactly what they were instructed to do, and opened up and spewed out all their PDF forms on websites. This is just the Commonwealth level, and this is not even all the agencies. So not a very good thing. That accounts for some of that $248 billion. What does it look like? Now, this is only 18 months ago. This is not the 1950s with all those people on the trains reading their newspapers. This is a government agency, unnamed, in Canberra. So the digital and paper worlds, in fact, do collide. And where they collide the most is here, the customer. This is actual example of a hairdresser, requires 27 different forms, applications and licenses just to run a hairdressing salon. And you can have a look at what's involved there. If they're going to serve coffee, they have to have a food safety plan, for example. Now, 90% of that hairdresser's time in interacting with government is providing data to government, and that's on the stats from the Standard Business Reporting. So my contention is, what would that hairdresser's business be like if it was the reverse? If government was providing that hairdresser 90% of the time with data back. So one of the most phenomenal innovations, I believe, in government has been Standard Business Reporting. Big fan of it, because it broke the thinking. It said, if we can come up with a taxonomy that the software industry would sort of buy into and map their product development of their business application software to this taxonomy, then what in fact would happen is that you would have businesses operating software which would transmit reports back to government seamlessly, machine to machine, which is in fact what happens. So all those other forms that are on the website, otherwise that the businesses would have to fill out and send back to government, is now done machine to machine, and this is an example of software eating service delivery. Of course, the problem is because it's a platform and agencies are silos, not all agencies are buying into this. Now that's one of the challenges for the administration in government, which I'll come back to. Sense T, another phenomenal example out of Tasmania, is where sensors are put onto some oysters to detect their heartbeats, which is proxy for the quality of the water quality. And that is transmitted real time back through the system. Otherwise, what the oyster farmers have to do is to go down and do water samples, fill in a form and send it back to the department. So we start thinking about different ways of conveying information. But we've spoken about information, we really haven't spoken about payments, which is typically what government does. And in the world to digital payments, more and more, these plastic cards and whatever keep proliferating. We need to think about this as a platform. And while we're in digital government, more and more apps, which is great, but that looks like the list of forms on government website. So we've got to keep thinking about what it is about operating as a platform and how does that change what we do. So, so here we go. Here's a good idea. We'll have some online accounts, which is excellent. I actually love the CommBank account, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But how many accounts does citizens really need or want? Now, if this wasn't enough, only last week or so, New South Wales came out and said, wow, we've got another one. So different online authentications, etc., etc. We're not reading the signs. So over the last couple of decades, there has been innumerable audits, reviews and reports that have said all sorts of things around IT projects. So we're not reading the signs because the very essence of government, which is data, is described in a bit of a jumble, and it's being called ICT projects. Now, all these aren't ICT projects. There's no such thing as an ICT project. So when we talk about big data, there is confusion around the assurance process in government when it's called ICT projects. Worse, these are the agency capabilities, or public information, so there you go. Agency capability reviews, which are on the Public Service Commission website, all say many of the same things. At the top of the list usually is data issues. We've got all these bad data issues and usually results in some sort of data breach. So when we're talking about big data, and wouldn't it be cool to do all these things, the machinery of government is struggling. So much so that in the APS Leadership Core Skills Strategy for 2015, where in this digital era is so focused, there is no mention of digital. So we need to have a rethink of what we do, and it's time for a phase change. Now, I don't know how many of you would remember this. I'm a NASA nut, so I love this stuff. And this is about architecture and platforms and how they interface. When we talk about big data, we can look at the opportunity to identify patterns which may not otherwise be observed. Have a look at the case study of the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in London collaborating with the Ferrari team. A very unlikely collaboration. The issue with the Children's Hospital was that there was clusters of post-surgical neonatal deaths in London, and many deaths, and they couldn't figure out what the problem was. Collaboration with Ferrari, because Ferrari is a phenomenal, absolute data analytics. That thing runs on data. And what was observed was common patterns, where you have the focus being either the little patient or the driver, and what's called high-risk handoffs, where time is of the essence. And so the hospital patterned their processes on the Ferrari team. And as a result of that, the incidence of post-surgical deaths plummeted. So we need to re-look at what we do. Ask what can be eliminated. Don't put all that stuff online, take it off. And I think that should be the challenge. So here is a couple of examples. Rego stickers are gone, along with that, all the logistics with that. Visa labels, the paper labels, gone, electronic, and obviously a decade or three ago, bank passports. And because of big data, and analytics, there's a whole opportunity to look at things differently. What would government service delivery look like if Google did design it? And that's not such a bad thing, because look at what happens elsewhere. And while we're talking about websites, why don't we forget them? Because very, very soon, I mean, it's already here, we've got these virtual assistants. I've got Cortana on my phone, and Cortana knows a heck of a lot about what I do, and perhaps we could ask Cortana for help about interacting with government. So going back to that first slide where I spoke about the hollowing out of jobs as a result of algorithms and automation, this is what it looks like. These are the jobs: office and admin support, sales, data entry, document preparation, and it's not that we're saying this is going to be net. There will be the opportunity to sort of refocus areas in frontline service delivery where many of us know it really is needed. I've only got two more slides to finish up, and I won't go through all of this one. But we need a fundamental rethink of the operating model and the machinery of government through the lens of platforms. And data. If in doubt, let it out. In summary, the biggest battle of big data is the platforms versus the silos. And I did a bit of a think about over the last 19th and 20th centuries what public administration looks like and what it would look like in the years to come. So we've been, and still are in, an era of the authority of the agencies, where we talk about IT systems and policy frameworks which clearly are not working. We talk about data intake, data retention, data management, and yet we still have data issues. There's data paywalls, intrusive control. Payments are just considered transactions. We've got duplicated investments all over the place because we don't have a capability architecture. We think of shared services and procurement and government's view of the citizen. So in the 21st century, it's the architecture of the platforms is dominant. Dominance of architecture and standards. Data is dynamically released. It's not like it's released when we're ready. It's released when it's done, when it's there. Taxonomies are published. Data exchange and not forms. We have to think about the connected citizen, the connected society. And instead of government's view of the citizen, it's citizens' view of the government, where citizen has choice. And when we look at all that, we see that data for the last many decades, if not century, has been a data servant. giving information to government. Citizen is now empowered with software and data, and I think that'll change the relationship between government and the citizen in a way that government won't have any control over. So while we see this divergence between platforms and silos, just like Uber and just like all those others where the consumer was empowered with software and data, we need to think about what the government and public administration response to be when we have a software-empowered consumer. Thank you.